Hello and welcome to Myth Monsters. My name is Erin and I'll be your host for these little snack bite-sized podcasts on folklore and mythical monsters from around the world. These podcasts focus on the actual cryptids, folklore and mythic monsters from global mythology, rather than focusing on the full stories of heroes and their big adventures. I'll also be dropping in some references that they have to recent culture, and where you can see these represented in modern day content, so that you can learn more and get as obsessed as I am about these absolute legends of the mythological world. I am so sorry this one is late. I managed to get a flu-like bug this week and it took out my voice for a good half the week, and then I had a big day rescuing my new cat Bilbo. But out of that, I got invited to BBC Radio Essex to talk about the podcast, as I'm local to the area, based off of Billy's GoFundMe, which is amazing, and it was an incredible experience. I did that on Monday. If you want the link to that, please again have a look on my social media. I posted it everywhere, and you can tune in to hear me talk about monsters for a good 15 minutes in my local radio station. Anyway, we are not looking at any feline or radio monster this week. In fact, we are heading to the deepest depths of the ocean for a monster that is relatively new in the cryptid space, the Ningen. The Ningen is described as an absolutely massive monster from Japanese folklore, although they tend to hang around the Arctic Circle in the deepest and coldest waters of the sea. They are around 60 to 100 feet in size, with white skin on a general humanoid-looking body. They are mostly described as having arms, legs, and even 5-fingered hands, but they've also said to have fins like a dolphin or even a mermaid as their legs. Ningen have black eyes like sharks, holes for a nose, and what seems like a permanent grin etched onto their face. However, no one has ever noticed seeing gills or teeth on this beastie either. They are also noted to be nocturnal and are only spotted in the dark of night, with their white skin shining out under the moonlight. There is also another potential description of these monsters, which is a bit more unlikely and ridiculous, and that's another humanoid-style creature, but with long legs attached to a circular head, covered in a thick white hair, with those same black, sad eyes, and an almost beak-like nose, and that same grin, but slightly expressionless mouth, standing at around 10 feet tall. This one is much less common than the first description, and generally lived on the ice rather than in the sea. They are considered a cryptid, which, just for the people at home who might be new, are considered creatures that have their existence in dispute as to whether they exist at all, and can sometimes be completely fictional, but not proven either way. Cryptids are the new mythical monster in the modern age, and this one is relatively new in the whole cryptid space, but I'll get onto that in their history later. Ningen have only ever been spotted in the Antarctic, where the water can be from 0 to -10 degrees nearer the surface, but of course, much deeper down can be amazingly colder than this, and is home to the most resilient of sea creatures. Salt water generally freezes at -2 degrees, hence all of the ice around it, and we know that Antarctica is the coldest place on the planet, so that kind of checks out. However, they are also spotted around Japan and the rest of Southeast Asia, as the sea can also be frigidly cold, but surprisingly nothing near Greenland or the other coldest point on the Earth in the north, rather than Antarctica in the south. We assume that Ningen survive out there because they are most likely covered in blubber like whales and seals, and they have been described before as blubbery creatures, much like me somewhere. But what about powers? Of course, most of this is assumption based on their limited contact with people, but we assume that it's mostly to do with survival in cold water, which most humanoid creatures are unable to do. We believe that Ningen are able to survive the crippling pressure of the deep sea due to their size, and are able to hold their breath for a ridiculous amount of time. And because of their humanoid nose shape and placement, it would make sense that they come to the surface face up to breathe. They would also generally need to swim incredibly well and be able to see in the pitch black of the deep ocean waters. Now, whilst they are terrifying to look at, they have never been noted as aggressive to humans. They have been seen by people on boats and in the water, and apparently have investigated either the vessel or the diver, and then carried on their business swimming away. Because of this, we don't know what they eat or how they reproduce, or even how they die and how long they live. We can only make assumptions based on whales, which are the only other creatures we know of in the sea that are as large and basically mammalian. They are also known to travel in pods like whales though, but they have been spotted on their own too. Now, let's hop on over to etymology. It's actually a pretty easy one this week. Ningen is a Japanese word and it literally means human, which is pretty creepy in this context with their humanoid appearance, so it makes sense, but I also hate it. There is a cooler etymology to this one though, and that's that it relates to another Japanese monster, the Ningyo, which is a Japanese mermaid and literally translates to human fish, which is where we believe the Ningen name actually came from in a monstrous sense. Of course, we'll cover the Ningyo at another time. But let's talk about why this monster is considered a Japanese monster. Because it is a weird one, considering that this monster is mostly known to be Antarctic. So how did it end up with a Japanese name and being linked to that folklore? The short answer is that the Japanese discovered the Ningen and named it. But also, it's only ever really been seen by Japanese people outside of Japan, and it's quite rare to be seen in the Antarctic. There aren't many people there. And even if it was spotted there, so simply, the Japanese or whoever found it would simply lay claim on it as their own anyway. The longer story of this goes into their history, so let's get into it. The Ningen was first seen in the 1960s by Japanese sailors, and this is really significant because these sailors were actually whalers. Japanese whaling has been controversial for an incredibly long time in the southern waters around Oceania, because they are known for poaching and illegally fishing in Australia and New Zealand's oceans, because mainly they overfished in their own sea space. In the 1930s, the Geneva Convention finally got fed up of Australia and New Zealand complaining and brought in anti-whaling policies. But the Japanese decided to ignore it, carrying on countless whales across the eastern and southeastern oceans, which led for the country to be chastised. And after World War II, when of course it was harder to whale anyway, they went back to these oceans, but instead under the guise of whale researching, to try and get away with the continued poaching and fishing illegally in these areas. But how does this relate to the Ningen? Well, that was because it was spotted in the 1960s. Japanese sailors reported that they had run into what they thought were icebergs going towards Antarctica, only to find that they were these massive humanoid beings. Sightings went on all through the 1900s from these whalers returning from Oceania and Antarctica, but of course went unreported due to the government's stress and trying to hide these illegal activities. Until 2002, when these creatures were propelled into the cryptid space fully on an online Japanese forum, when a user decided to finally break the silence and write down a story that he had heard about the Ningen. Now, I've got the full extract. It's not crazy long, but it is a bit longer than usual, but it is totally worth it, so stay with me. I heard that the research whaling surrounding the Antarctic Sea, conducted by the Japanese government, is not only conducting research on what whales they catch, but also researching and recording whales they do not catch. In the last few years of research, it is said that some objects cannot be officially announced. This information is gained directly from a person involved. These are what is called among people related to research whaling as hitogata butai, or human-shaped objects. There are several types of them, such as one that looks like a human with 4 limbs and a head, and one that looks as if 2 humans' upper bodies are joined. They emerge from the water just like whales. The whole body is white, and the size is a few tens of meters long. I heard that nobody had seen such a thing when they were conducting whaling years ago. They are really baffled at it, because an official announcement of the object could overturn the credibility of the current research whaling. They are just recording them, but that does not mean they are vigorously conducting research on them, as they have to submit their research schedule to the International Committee. They cannot change their schedule flexibility. The person who told me this story said, "You can tell this story, but please keep me anonymous, though I am pretty sure that other people are telling this story too." That's all I heard. This amazing article was followed up by another article in a famous British monster magazine called Mysterious Universe in 2007, which unfortunately I can't get access to without paying for, and I don't want to, quite frankly. But the article went into the possibility of unidentified creatures inhabiting the southern seas, and it included a Google Earth screenshot showing what looks like a Ningen in the South Atlantic Ocean off the coast of Namibia, which you can still see on Google Earth if you set the date to 2002, and you can find those coordinates online. I won't read them out, it's too long and it's weird. There is an argument that showing photos of these taken by the Japanese government would tarnish the scientific reputation of their whaling research program, which I will say for those wanting a just end to that illegal whale hunting history, thankfully, Japan was told to get out of the oceans around Oceania. However, they do still push their luck and are often captured by Sea Shepherd, which is an amazing ocean charity who go out on their own vessels to stop illegal fishing and whaling throughout the oceans. I highly recommend donating to them. If any charity, they're amazing. I've been doing it for 4 years. They're brilliant. But anyway, this makes this monster quite controversial because of the red tape surrounding the Japanese government and their known secrecy across the world about whaling programs, but also the protectiveness around their folklore, as that is such a protected concept within Japanese culture. So it's definitely a really interesting political monster too. Now, because the Ningen are nocturnal, and the sea is generally a hard place to take photos, the Ningen are incredibly hard to capture on film, and so generally are disputed to be created from these social media posts back in 2002, as we have no written down history before these posts. But to finish off recent history, there were videos uploaded on YouTube of the Ningen back in 2010, from a Japanese chemical research company, where a supposed Ningen is eating something from the ocean floor, which was followed up the same year by another video posted anonymously of a Ningen approaching the camera, which, if you can find a copy of, I've seen it, it is quite spooky, so just as a pre-warning, if you're scared of things emerging from the sea, that is not the video for you. They were also reported in the UK Daily Mirror, which is a tabloid newspaper over here, as a blubbery monster human back in 2010 too. However, it was mostly looking into the video from 2010 and delving into why it was definitely a fake sighting or a completely fake video. But let's carry on this debunking path. What could this actually be if it's not a monster? Well, the obvious one here is a beluga whale. These beautiful white whales with bulbous heads are known around colder waters, however are nowhere near the size of a usual whale or a Ningen. The other whale alternative is just an albino humpback, grey or bowhead whale, which are really common in those colder waters throughout Antarctica, and are much more likely to be this big, although still nowhere as big as the reports of the Ningen. 100 feet is a huge amount. There is also just the really boring thought that this could be the result of water changing the perception of photos, and it could just be ice or waves along the water in the photos taken from the surface. My favourite potential explanation is actually that it could be an extinct sea sloth, and who knew there were sea sloths about? Which were 100% real, by the way. They were called Thessalonicus, and they were marine adaptations of the sloths we know today, but they generally looked a bit more like capybaras in the face, those big giant rodents. And they generally bottom fed along the ocean floor with long arms, but had to come up for air. Could the Ningen be descendants who have lost all of their hair and cuteness? Maybe, but it's definitely my favourite one. For mythical comparisons, we don't really have any whale-like cryptids like this, and actually we don't have any Antarctic myth monsters at all to compare to, which is amazing and super unique, but also, boo! I have got to compare them to the Kraken from Norse mythology, of course, just due to their gargantuan size and the fact that they are deep water boys. However, the Kraken was thought to be a tentacled monster and did often attack ships and eat people, so it kind of takes that one out of the running. Although, another one is the legendary Leviathan from biblical mythology, who is the basis for most Renaissance map sea monsters. A massive sea monster who could eat the world and lives at the bottommost depths could totally be a Ningen. So I think this one maybe is our top contender for a comparison. I have covered the Kraken before, but the Leviathan is yet to have its own episode, but I am absolutely so excited to cover that one at some point. Now, before we jump over to the media segment, the Ningen is still really significant within the Japanese folklore space. It is considered to be one of the most impactful, fun, and rare Japanese cryptids, as we tend to see more mythical and folklore monsters dripping in history from this part of the world. It's still really prevalent in Asian media, from J-pop songs about it, Hatsune Miku, the viral pop star, having a music video with her riding one, and even them popping up in countless bits of artwork, podcasts and fantasy books throughout the 2010s to this day, as this beloved gentle giant of the deep sea who looks like everything out of my nightmares. Now let's scoot on to modern media. There's literally nothing on this one, because it is an especially new cryptid. So I have filled this one up with other cryptozoology, and specifically water cryptozoology media, where you can see similar stories to this one, similar creatures, but unfortunately I have nothing specific. For art though, we can focus more on the Ningen, because there's actually quite a lot of art based around this monster. There are loads and loads of images of them on the wider web, and there's a load of independent artwork as well. So I'd really recommend you check them out, but I don't have any more details than that, I'm afraid. Just be careful that they sometimes can be a bit creepy. In movies, we have Cryptozoo, The Mothman Prophecies, Loch Ness, King Kong, Atlantis, The Lost Empire, Sinbad, Legend of the Seven Seas, Aquaman, Cloverfield, Star Wars, and Godzilla. For TV, we have Kagewani, Lost Tapes, The X-Files, Monster Quest, Destination Truth, Hilda, Stormhawk, Scooby-Doo, The Secret Saturdays, Berserk, Digimon Fusion, Yu-Gi-Oh!, Gravity Falls, Ben 10, and The Real Ghostbusters. In video games, we have ones such as Disco Elysium, Barrow Hill, Soul Sacrifice, StarCraft 2, Castlevania Dawn of Sorrow, Metal Gear Solid, Devil May Cry 3 Dante's Awakening, Abzu, Sunless Sea, City of Heroes, Dishonored, Tomb Raider Legend, Dragon City, Skylanders, Dragon Quest IX, The Witcher 2, Endless Ocean, Final Fantasy 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 9, 10, 14, 15 and 16, Golden Sun, Mass Effect 3, Monster Hunter, Pokemon, The Ocean Hunter, Sea of Thieves, Subnautica, Fallout 4, Tales of Monkey Island and World of Warcraft. My book recommendation this week is to have a look at Treasury of Folklore, Sea and Rivers, Sirens, Selkies and Ghost Ships by D.D. Cheney and Willow Winsham for some more sea monsters. But for more creepypasta style stories, have a look at the Creepypasta collection, Modern Urban Legends You Can't Unread by Mr. Creepypasta. However, do make sure that you are very prepared to read these. They are designed to be horror and very scary, so please don't let kids read them. And of course, be wary of your own nightmares in this case. But now it's time for Do I Think They Existed? I would more than eagerly say no for this one in normal instances. If this was lurking around the neighbourhoods rather than in the deep sea, totally. If you're a long-term listener, you know that I have a crippling fear of the ocean, and my answer with any sea monster is that we just do not know. It's too deep, too dark and too scary, and the thought of these existing literally makes me want to shrivel up in a little ball and blink out of existence. But we just would not be able to prove or disprove that they could be a possibility, because most things can be under the sea. But this one does look to be the creation of internet users. I hate to say it. It plays on the fears of most people and the human-like features, the almost smile, the massive size, and the under-the-sea concept. It is the perfect makeup for a monster that could creep out some of the hardiest people. And creepypastas are known for doing such. And these kind of creepypastas start on those kind of internet forums like Reddit and those Japanese ones that the Ningen came from. So it's a hint of reality, but also a big dose of fiction in there. I do personally think that it might be albino whales, if anything, or belugas or icebergs, and they could possibly explain sightings of this one. But then again, to go back to my previous point, I don't think I'd actually want to bump into any of these whilst on a boat either. Not that I have anything against whales, they are massive and quite scary, but they're quite sweet, I guess. But what do you think? Did the Ningen float around the Antarctic? Let me know on Twitter, I would love to know what you think about this one. And what a wild monster this week is one that creeps me out, but thankfully, its location means that I'm much less likely to swim into one when I get over my fear and stick my feet in the water somewhere. Next week though, we're heading over to the US, specifically West Virginia, for a bright light. And it's not the Mothman, I wish it was again, but it's actually another equally legendary US monster, the Flatwoods Monster. Come hunting for this little green alien next Thursday with me. But for now, thank you so much for listening. It's been an absolute pleasure. If you enjoyed this podcast, please give it a rating on the service you are listening on. I've got the Twitter for any questions or suggestions on what monsters to cover next, and I'd really love to hear from you. The social media handles for TikTok, YouTube, Threads and Instagram are Myth Monsters Podcast, and the Twitter is Myth Monsters Pod. But all of our content can be found at mythmonsters.co.uk, including some very cool merchandise. And you can also find us on Good Pods, Buy Me a Coffee and Patreon if you want to help me fund the podcast too. Come join the fun though, share this with your pals. They might love me as much as you do. But for now, stay spooky. And I'll see you later, babes.